Hey, what's up guys? It's Zoris. Today we're going to be taking a look at pseudo-depth-of-field in the 3D Stroke plugin from Particular. Here's what we'll be creating today. Okay, as I've already said, we're going to be talking about pseudo-depth-of-field and a way to use it with 3D Stroke today. Pseudo-depth-of-field is when you create your own depth of field for a clip that has none. There are a couple ways to go about creating pseudo-depth-of-field, but instinctively, we most likely will do it the wrong way. So I'm going to show you guys a couple examples. And first we're going to create a new composition. I'm going to make a new solid. We'll name it checker. And we'll apply a checkerboard effect to it. Okay. Now, if somebody wanted to have it blur from left to right, so say it was really blurry on the left, and then it would be not blurry on the right, what most people will do is they'll create a new adjustment layer. They'll apply a fast blur, or just any blur really. So they'll apply their blur, and then they'll start blurring it out, repeat edge pixels, and then all they do is they mask half of the adjustment layer, or however much they want to blur. Then they go to feather by hitting F, and then they just feather it out. There's a problem with this. We can see that it's blurry here, but if we look at it, we see these edges in the middle of where it should be blurred. Now the problem is, it's not graduating the blur. It's graduating the opacity of a single amount of blur over the layer. So rather than getting more blurry and less blurry, we're simply fading in an instance, if you will, of a blurred layer. Now, if we were to do this the right way, we would delete this adjustment layer. We create a new solid, make it black. Then another new solid, make it white. Then we add a linear wipe to the top layer, in this case the white one. Set the transition completion to 50. And let's just feather that out a good bit. Now what we do is we pre-comp the black and white solids that are faded over each other. We'll name it depth map. We'll make it so it's not visible. And then we apply a lens blur to the checkerboard. Then we set the depth map layer to the depth map. And we raise our radius, just so we can see an exaggerated effect. So what this is doing is it's taking the luminance, or the brightness, from that gradient. It's mapping the black to no blur, and it's mapping the white to high blur. So as it fades from white to black, we can see that there's less and less blur. There are no edges like we saw before. And then when we get to where the black would be, there's no blur. So that's the correct way to create pseudo-depth-of-field. We just use lens blur with a depth map. Now there also is another plugin we can use rather than lens blur. It's just not native to After Effects. It's called Depth of Field. It's a part of the Lens Care package made by Fishluft. And we do the same thing. We set our depth layer to depth map. And we raise our radius. This one to me renders faster, so if you have this plugin, by all means use it. Having said that, we can close it out of this comp. And what we want to do first is we're going to create a depth map for this scene. So we have the guy jumping out of the window, and then we have the building. So what we're going to do is we want to mask everything and create separate layers for each of the parts we want to blur separately. So I've already done some masking in advance. I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through me masking it, and then I'll show you what I did at the end. So basically, we have our man. Then we have the facade of the building. Then we have the sky, so we'll name the sky. And then we have the raw footage, and since everything else is covering it, except for the interior, we're just going to go ahead and rename this to interior. And now I'm just going to solo each layer to see what they all look like separately. Okay, and if I solo the sky, I'm noticing that it's the same thing as the facade. So I'm just going to go ahead and remask that to where it just shows the sky. Okay, so now everything's masked out. What we're going to do, so now we're going to select everything by shift-clicking on the first and the last, then duplicate them by hitting Control D. Then we'll bring them up to the top. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a depth map for our scene. First, we'll take note of the man. He starts out back in the scene, and then as we scrub through, we see how he starts to move closer to the camera. So in our depth map, the value for our man, as far as black and white, is going to have to get brighter over time. So we're going to apply a fill to him, and this is the copy I'm applying the fill to. And we'll start out having him black. We'll have our blacks be the deep. Actually, let's make him more of a dark gray. And then we'll keyframe our color, and by the time he gets even with the facade, which is, if we turn this off real quick, right about here, he comes out of the facade. Then we'll set him to white. So now if we scrub through, we see how he's fading from black to white as he gets closer to the camera, of course. And let's feather this mask a little bit for our guy. That's good. And before we forget, let's name this copy of the man that has the fill. We'll name it Man Matte. Okay, now for the facade of the building. And the facade is rather close to the camera, and we want to be in focus the whole time. So we're going to give him a fill, and we're going to make it white. Now for the sky, we want that to be very blurred out. So we'll apply a fill to the sky, make it black. Now if we solo our interior, we see that we can see everything, but that's no problem because the sky and the facade and the man mats, they all are covering everything else. So the interior, we don't really need to worry about masking that since everything else is masked, and that's just what's left over. So now we're going to apply a ramp to the interior, and we're just going to angle it in a way that it follows the contours of the walls. So something like this. And we'll make this a dark gray. And this just off-white. So now we have this. It's our scene in the form of depth. And notice how we have animated the color of the man because that's what's changing over time as far as depth is concerned. But there's a lot of contrast between the man's black and the background of the interior. So I'm just going to go ahead and fade it a little more over to the right. So right about this. So now what we do is we pre-comp all of our mats or things that we filled out. We'll pre-compose those. We'll name this depth. Turn it off. Then we'll turn interior back on. If you're going to stop at depth of field, you could delete these, but I'm going to keep them just in case we want to do something special later. So now we'll apply a lens blur to the interior, which is really just the raw footage. It's just that everything else was covering it, so it happened to be the interior. So now we're going to set our depth map layer to that depth pre-comp we created, and just raise the iris radius. And we can see it's messed up. It's actually blurring from the wrong side of the luma spectrum. We don't want to redo our whole depth map. So all we have to do is click Invert Depth Map, and then we'll go back into our depth, and we'll find the facade, and we'll feather this about 2 pixels, just because it looked kind of rough. Okay, so now we have this. Starts out, man's in the building, very blurred out. Then, as he comes out, we'll see he's getting less and less blurred. Becomes more and more clear. And now he's really starting to get some clarity there. And now he's visible. Okay, so that's it for the depth of field. In the next video, we're going to be adding that stroke I showed you from the beginning. It really is exciting stuff. So even if this bored you a little bit, it's going to be worth it in the end when we create this 3D stroke to go into our scene. So stay tuned, thank you, and goodbye.